Okay, so picture this, right? 1935. The heart of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Like a time of just immense change. Like echoes of revolution are still kind of hanging in the air,
Yeah.
and you're a coal miner just, working tirelessly in the depths of the earth. Suddenly you're like plucked from obscurity and just like made a national hero.
Yeah.
Your face is on posters, your name's on everyone's lips, you're showered with gifts, praise, even a personal thank you from Stalin himself. This is the story of Alexei Stakhanov.
Wow, it really is a story that captures the imagination, isn't it? The seemingly ordinary man achieving extraordinary feats. But what you've brought us today kind of dives deeper than just the headlines. It challenges us to kind of look beyond that heroic facade and uncover the truth behind the Stakhanovite movement.
Exactly. And it's this tale of ambition and propaganda and the immense power of Stalin's cult of personality.
Right.
And we're going to uncover how this single miner became like the poster child for this entire nation's industrial aspirations, the impact it had on just the lives of everyday Soviet citizens.
And perhaps even more intriguing is we're going to see how this seemingly distant historical event still resonates with us today, offering insights into our own modern workplace culture.
That's exactly right. So to truly grasp the significance of Stakhanov's and his legacy, we need to start with the setting, right? We're talking about the Soviet Union under Stalin, a time of just radical transformation driven by his five-year plans.
These plans were designed to rapidly industrialize the USSR, transform it from an agrarian society into a global industrial powerhouse. So it was a period of immense upheaval and change, with Stalin pushing for collectivized agriculture and rapid industrial output.
And that push for collectivization, it really had a devastating impact on some, especially the kulaks.
The kulaks were independent farmers, often seen as more prosperous than others. They became targets during this period of forced collectivization. Their elimination was a tragic and brutal chapter in Soviet history.
And all of this really had dire consequences for the Soviet economy, didn't it? The first five-year plan, with its forced collectivization and just unrealistic goals, it led to famine, especially in Ukraine.
Absolutely. The Holodomor, as it's known, was a horrific famine that resulted from those very policies. It left millions dead, and serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of these, ambitious and top-down economic plans.
So here you have a nation really struggling to meet these unrealistic production goals, a population reeling from famine and hardship. It seems like the government was in desperate need of a win,
Right.
of like a symbol of hope and Soviet strength.
That's where Alexei Stakhanov enters the picture.
Right. So he was a coal miner, living a fairly ordinary life, born into a peasant family, worked in the notoriously difficult Donbas coal mines. And his world just seemed so far removed from the halls of power in Moscow until, that is, the night of August 31st, 1935.
That's the night, at least according to official accounts, that Stakhanov mined 102 tons of coal
Wow.
in a single 6-hour shift.
That's almost impossible to even fathom. Can you imagine just the sheer physical effort involved in that kind of output?
It's 14 times the usual output for a miner. While the story was presented as a testament to Stakhanov's work ethic and ingenuity, as you pointed out in your research, there's a lot more to this story.
So much more. He went from living in a cramped apartment to a life of just like privilege.
Yeah.
He was given a new apartment, a horse and buggy, basically became a celebrity overnight.
Right.
But, as we'll see, this seemingly organic rise to fame was carefully orchestrated.
Precisely. And that orchestration really speaks volumes about the political climate at the time.
Exactly. And it raises questions about the truth behind the official narrative.
Yeah.
Do you think that people at the time actually bought into this story of the hardworking miner achieving these like superhuman feats?
Oh, absolutely. Stakhanov's image was plastered everywhere. Newspapers, posters, even films. He became like the model Soviet worker, embodying the ideals of hard work and dedication. His name became synonymous with exceeding expectations, pushing beyond perceived limits.
But that pressure to perform,
Right.
to constantly outdo yourself, it had like a darker side to it, didn't it? It wasn't all parades and celebrations.
There were, of course, consequences, often overlooked in the official narrative.
Right.
The relentless push for increased productivity, for exceeding norms, took a toll on the workers. And any critique of the movement, any questioning of Stakhanov's achievements was swiftly silenced.
So while Stakhanov was enjoying his newfound fame and touring the country promoting his work methods, a much more complex, frankly troubling reality was playing out on the ground.
Yes, and it's crucial to understand this duality. The propaganda machine churning out these heroic tales of Stakhanov while everyday workers faced mounting pressure and often impossible demands.
It highlights the power of propaganda, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To shape perceptions and just control the narrative. Even back then, as we'll see in the sources you provided, there were those who saw through the facade, right? Those who questioned the authenticity of Stakhanov's feat.
The Time magazine article from 1935 is particularly insightful. It highlights the inherent contradictions within the movement and recognizes the potential dangers of this kind of relentless push for productivity.
Which brings us to a crucial point. Stalin's role in all of this. He wasn't just a passive observer, was he?
Not at all.
He actively embraced and promoted this Stakhanovite movement.
Very much so. And his speech at the first conference of the Stakhanovite movement is a perfect example of how he used the movement to further his own agenda.
It was like a masterful display of propaganda, wasn't it? Presenting the movement as this spontaneous and organic expression of socialist ideals.
Right.
But as your research suggests, the reality was much different.
Oh, absolutely. The movement was highly orchestrated from the top down. It was a tool to boost production, to showcase the supposed superiority of the Soviet system, and of course, to further solidify Stalin's own cult of personality.
So while Stalin was praising Stakhanov and his fellow workers,
Right.
touting them as these heroes of the Soviet Union, the reality for most workers was far less glamorous.
Yeah.
It was a reality of pressure, of unrealistic expectations, and in many cases, just exploitation.
And that's where this deep dive gets even more interesting. It's not just about uncovering the truth behind Stakhanov's story, but about exploring the lasting impact of the movement he inspired both in the Soviet Union and beyond.
Right. So let's move on to explore what happened next.
Mm-hmm.
Did this Stakhanovite movement, this push for ever-increasing productivity, did it last? And what about Stakhanov himself? What happened to him after his meteoric rise to fame?
Well, the Stakhanovite movement, despite all its inherent contradictions, did have a lasting impact on Soviet society.
So it wasn't just like a fleeting moment of propaganda then?
Not at all. The concept of the shock worker, someone who consistently exceeded those production norms, became very deeply embedded in Soviet work culture.
Right.
It was used to drive productivity, not just in coal mining, but across various industries.
I guess that makes sense. You have this like national hero, this seemingly ordinary man achieving these extraordinary feats. It's easy to see how that could be used to motivate others to work harder.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that this wasn't just about individual effort and motivation. The Stakhanovite movement was a tool, really, wielded by the Communist Party to achieve their own economic and political goals.
It sounds like a bit of a double-edged sword then.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have this inspiring figure, encouraging people to strive for excellence. But on the other, you have this potential for exploitation and this relentless pressure to just conform.
Precisely. And as time went on, the cracks in the Stakhanovite model started to show.
Okay.
Workers, even with the best intentions, simply couldn't sustain those superhuman levels of output indefinitely.
Right.
And those promises of rewards and recognition often failed to materialize.
So what about Stakhanov himself? What happened to him after that initial wave of fame and adulation? Did he maintain that hero status?
His story actually takes some interesting turns as we move into the post-Stalin era.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, after Stalin's death in 1953, Nikita Khrushchev came to power and initiated a period of de-Stalinization.
Right.
It was a move away from the cult of personality that had defined Stalin's rule and kind of a reassessment of many of the policies and practices of that era.
So how did that impact Stakhanov? Did he, fall out of favor?
He did. In a way, he became a symbol of the excesses of the Stalinist era. He was essentially demoted, sent back to the Donbas region, far from the prestige and privilege of Moscow.
Wow. That's quite a fall from grace for someone who was once the darling of the Soviet state.
It was seen by many as a form of exile. Stakhanov, who had once been lauded as a hero, was now sidelined, almost forgotten. It makes you wonder how he must have felt about it all.
Right.
Did he buy into his own myth, or did he kind of see the strings being pulled all along?
That's a fascinating question. It must have been a very difficult and confusing time for him. Do we have any insights into his thoughts or feelings during those later years?
Well, his daughter later described him as feeling abandoned by the very system that had once elevated him.
Oh, wow.
He struggled with alcoholism, and there's this sense of isolation and disillusionment in accounts from that time.
It's almost like a tragic element to his story.
Yeah.
He goes from being this symbol of Soviet progress to a somewhat forgotten figure, grappling with the consequences of a movement that was ultimately built on a fabricated narrative.
And as Khrushchev's reforms took hold, The Stakhanovite movement itself began to fade from prominence. It became clear that that model of constant overachievement was simply unsustainable
Right.
and frankly detrimental to the well-being of the workers.
So while the movement itself lost steam, Stakhanov's name and the term Stakhanovite, they continue to be used, don't they?
Yeah.
What's like the lasting legacy of his story?
Absolutely. His story continues to be studied and debated. It offers valuable insights into the relationship between labor, propaganda, and political power. And it raises some important questions about the pressures we face in our own work lives today.
That's what I find so fascinating about kind of delving into these historical events. They might seem distant, but they often hold up a mirror to our own times, don't they?
Exactly. So let's unpack some of those key takeaways. What can we learn from Stakhanov's story that might be relevant to us today?
I think one of the most obvious ones is just the power of narratives,
Uh-huh.
especially in like a controlled media environment.
Right.
The Soviet government was able to completely control the narrative around Stakhanov, shaping public perception and using his story for their own ends.
Yeah.
And it worked remarkably well.
Yes, and that's a crucial reminder for us today, to be critical of the information that we're given, especially when it comes from those in power.
Right.
To look beyond the headlines, to dig deeper, to question the motives behind the stories we're being told.
Absolutely. It's about media literacy, about being informed and discerning consumers of information. Now, I know our sources also highlight some concerns about workplace culture and this pressure to overachieve. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Certainly. Stakhanov's story raises some uncomfortable questions about the pressure to constantly exceed expectations, to push ourselves beyond our limits.
Right.
While hard work and ambition are admirable, it's important to recognize the potential dangers of pushing too far,
Right.
of sacrificing well-being in the pursuit of ever-increasing productivity.
It's like that old saying, all work and no play.
Yeah.
We need balance, right? We need to recognize our own limits, to prioritize our mental and physical health.
Yeah.
I feel like this is particularly relevant in today's world, where we're constantly bombarded with messages about productivity and achievement.
I agree. We see echoes of that Stakhanovite mentality in certain industries where long hours and intense pressure are considered the norm.
Right.
It's almost as if the idea of a work-life balance is seen as a weakness rather than a necessity for a healthy and fulfilling life.
It's like we're still grappling with the legacy of that Stakhanovite ideal.
Yeah.
This notion that we need to be constantly striving, constantly pushing ourselves to the brink. I think this deep dive has really given us a lot to think about, both in terms of the past and how it shapes our present.
I agree. And there's one more aspect of Stakhanov's story that I find particularly interesting. It's a point you highlighted in your research,
Okay.
and I think it's worth exploring further.
Okay, what is it?
Well, despite the staged nature of his record-breaking shift and the eventual decline of the movement itself, there's still something remarkable about Stakhanov's initial feat.
Okay,
Even if we acknowledge the orchestrated elements, the assistance he received, it was still an incredibly demanding physical accomplishment.
you're talking about the actual act of mining 102 tons of coal in 6 hours.
Exactly. Those pneumatic drills they used were notoriously heavy and difficult to operate. It must have been grueling work, even with assistance.
Yeah.
And he kept at it for 6 straight hours. That speaks to a level of strength and endurance that's hard to dismiss.
That's a great point. It adds another layer of complexity to this story.
Yeah.
While we can critique the propaganda and the exploitative aspects of the Stakhanovite movement, we shouldn't completely discount Stakhanov's own physical capabilities
Right.
and the effort that he exerted.
It reminds us that history is rarely black and white. It's full of nuances, of contradictions, of individual stories that are both remarkable and deeply flawed.
And by exploring those complexities, by understanding the forces that shaped those individual stories, we gain a deeper understanding of the past
Right.
and its relevance to our own lives.
Precisely. So while we can critique the Stakhanovite movement and its legacy, I think it's also important to recognize those individual stories,
Right.
those glimpses of human resilience and determination, even within a system that was ultimately designed to exploit them.
I couldn't agree more. This deep dive has been a fascinating journey, uncovering the truth behind the myth, exploring the complexities of a movement that continues to resonate, and ultimately reminding us of the importance of balance, of critical thinking, and recognizing the human element in every story.
Great.
But before we wrap up, there's one more crucial question we need to address. What happened to Stakhanov after his fall from grace? And what does his story ultimately tell us about the legacy of the Stakhanovite movement, both in the Soviet Union and beyond?
Yeah, it's almost like Stakhanov's story embodies those contradictions and complexities we've been discussing.
Yeah.
He was this symbol of achievement, yet his achievements were manufactured.
Right.
He inspired this movement, but that movement ultimately proved detrimental.
Right.
And then after all that, he was essentially discarded by the very system that had made him the hero.
It is a tragic trajectory, isn't it? And it speaks to the often disposable nature of individuals within these larger political systems. It really makes you think about that fine line between like genuine accomplishment and the stories that we construct around those accomplishments,
Yikes.
both for ourselves and for others.
That's a question that resonates with so many historical figures, not just Stakhanov.
Right.
We often find ourselves grappling with separating the myth from the reality, particularly when those myths have been so carefully cultivated and perpetuated.
It also makes me reflect on the pressures we face in our own lives.
Yeah.
Like the need to constantly strive for more,
Right.
to be the best, the most productive.
Mm.
It's like that Stakhanovite mentality is still alive and well in some ways, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's pervasive in many modern workplaces, this idea that we need to be constantly exceeding expectations, pushing ourselves to the limit. And as you pointed out, social media often amplifies that pressure with everyone showcasing their achievements and seemingly perfect lives.
Right. And it's easy to feel inadequate in comparison,
Yeah.
to feel like you're not doing enough, not achieving enough.
And it's important to remember that those online personas are often carefully curated. They don't always reflect the full reality, the struggles, the setbacks, the moments of self-doubt that we all experience.
So how do we find that balance then?
Right.
How do we strive for excellence without falling into that trap of Stakhanovism, of just like burning ourselves out in the pursuit of this unattainable ideal?
It's a question that requires careful consideration and self-awareness.
Right.
We need to set realistic goals, prioritize our well-being, and recognize that true success isn't just about output, but also about fulfillment and sustainability.
It's about finding that sweet spot where you're challenging yourself,
Yeah.
growing and contributing, but also taking care of your mental and physical health.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing your own limits and understanding that it's okay to not be superhuman all the time.
Precisely. And it's also about creating a culture that values well-being alongside productivity, where people feel supported and empowered to do their best work without sacrificing their health or happiness.
That's such an important point. It's not just about individual responsibility, but also about creating systems and workplaces that prioritize that healthy balance, that sustainable approach to work and achievement.
Exactly. And perhaps that's one of the most enduring lessons we can take from Stakhanov's story. It's a reminder that progress and achievement shouldn't come at the expense of human well-being.
Right.
That true progress is about finding that balance, that sweet spot where individual fulfillment and societal advancement go hand in hand.
This has been an incredible deep dive,
Yeah.
full of twists and turns and thought-provoking insights.
Yeah.
It's amazing how a single individual story can reveal so much about a particular time and place, and how those echoes can continue to resonate with us today.
I'm glad you found it engaging. It's a story that continues to fascinate and challenge us, even decades later.
It certainly makes you think about the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that are told about us,
Right.
and how those narratives shape our understanding of history, of the world around us, and even of our own lives.
Well said. And as we navigate the complexities of the modern world with its own pressures and demands, Stakhanov's tale serves as a timely reminder to approach those challenges with a critical eye and a healthy dose of self-awareness. To question the narratives we're presented with, to prioritize our well-being, and to strive for a more balanced and sustainable approach to work and life.
So if this deep dive has left you pondering your own work-life balance, or maybe questioning those narratives you encounter, whether it's in the news or on social media, consider this our final provocation. Take some time to reflect on what you've learned and how it applies to your own life. After all, that's what these deep dives are all about, empowering you to think critically, to question assumptions, and to engage with the world in a more informed and insightful way. And if you find yourself wanting to delve deeper into any of the topics we've touched on today, be sure to let us know. We're always eager to craft another deep dive just for you.